Let's check out why it's important to review information even after learning it. Hermann Ebbinghaus studied his own memory and how quickly he forgot things.
We've already gone over this. This is a repeat of the information to give you a spaced repetition. You're welcome.
He graphed over the course of a month how quickly he did, in fact, forget things. And originally, you could see his recall got worse and worse and worse as time progressed.
And those were those 2,300 words.
And he created something called the forgetting curve. And this forgetting curve over here mapped out how we forget. And he mapped out two situations. One, a theoretical situation, assuming that after a lecture, we remembered 100% of all the information.
Which we never do. We always forget some stuff, myself included. I'm not perfect.
And then kind of more realistic estimation that we probably only remember about 80% after
a
lecture. And he tried to figure out how we're able to beat the curve. And basically what he found out was that if we have multiple repeats of the information, it's specifically 4 repeats over the course of about a month with spaced repetition, he's able to fight the forgetting curve and we wouldn't forget as easily.
So this is the method that he came up with. We, over the years, have developed another method that's even better than that method, which is when we space our testing out over here, we want our first testing to be as fast as possible. In other words, immediately. Then, if possible, you want to test it again later that day, like after 8 hours have passed, then the next day, and then 2 days later, and then 4 days later, and then 8 days later, and then 16. In other words, doubling that length, unless you forget the information. If you follow these 5 steps, and you have flashcards or any method of testing yourself and you follow this method, I guarantee you get a B or higher on every test because you will remember it, because what you're doing is you're lessening the forgetting. In other words, you're increasing the strength of your memory by giving yourself that repeated testing. Not reading it, but repeated testing of that information, which is why things like quizzes are playing, we're going to play in the class a lot because I know they're really effective. We're going to also go over this in class, but this over here is the 5-step method for remembering, which is built off of what Ehrman figured out in this one over here. So the one we talk about is going to be more effective. This is effective too.
So what ended up happening is he practiced where if you had class, immediately after class, 10 minutes after, he got himself a repeat of the information through reviewing his notes or practicing through multiple different study methods. Speaking of 4 reviews of information, this is my favorite way to study, and it is called the Feynman technique. And what you have to do for the Feynman technique, there are 4 parts to it. The first part is just pick what you want to learn. The second step is to write out an explanation as if you're going to teach it to someone else. And I find that using an iPad and Apple Pencil, being able to draw everything out is a fantastic way to do so.
So to recap, over here, Feynman technique. How do we use it? First, pick what we're going to learn, then try and teach it. The third step is going to be look for the gaps in our teaching, like what did we not teach very well, and then try and simplify our learning over here and try and explain it like to a 5-year-old. So if I chose to learn about outer space, and then I tried to teach what is outer space to a friend. And I'm like, okay, outer space is this place that's above the atmosphere. And then I'm like, okay, well, how high above the atmosphere was it? I didn't know what that was. And how long does it take to get to space? So I'm looking for the gaps that I may not have known and trying to explain it in a way that a 5-year-old would do it. Once I've figured out my gaps, I can then, in realizing that I couldn't simplify it good enough, I can then go back and I can try and fill those gaps in using the technique we already learned called elaborative investigation over here, which is asking questions to get more information over here. So the Feynman technique, CTGS, choose, teach, gaps, simplify, and that is the Feynman technique over here. Super effective. You can Google it if you want. Let's keep watching.
Writing your own notes and drawing your own pictures, it's being embedded in your memory. Third step of the Feynman technique is to fill in the gaps of what you don't understand. And the best way to figure out what you don't understand is to read through your notes and to look for something that you don't understand, and then you go look that up on Google. The final step is to make it as succinct as possible so that anyone could understand you, almost like you're going to explain it to a 5-year-old.
Yep.
And by going through all 4 of these steps, you've proven that you know it, because if you're explaining it to someone, especially on a video, it is impossible for you to not know it.
It's true.
Now back to the forgetting curve. And then after 24 hours, he repeated that information again. So instead of falling down to about 50-60% of the information, that
8 hours
helps you remember the information. After 1 week, And then after about a month, those same 4 repeats ended up so that his final amount of information was between 80 and 90% of the original information.
That's good
So those
stuff.
repeats help embed it into memory. So what we learned from the forgetting curve is 4 repeats of
Minimum.
information helps us remember that information through spaced repetition. So in conclusion, to make sure that you remember everything that you want to do, don't just read information, make sure you actually study it.
Because reading only builds what? Fluency. Testing builds what? Mastery.
And when you are studying something, make sure you use something like the Feynman technique to make sure you embed it in your brain. Make sure you preview the information the 4 ways I showed you, and make sure that when you are reviewing the information, you space it out according to the forgetting curve in those intervals so you maximize what you remember and you don't forget stuff.
All right, guys. So that was this video. Go answer the questions. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.